It's time for today's episode of the College Recruiting Weekly Podcast with your host, figure skating legend, and America's college recruiting guru, Dan Tudor.
Gotta get back on the road again. Ooh, gotta get back on
And
the road.
Coach, I am on the road again. I'm actually coming to you to open the podcast from the San Diego International Airport on my way back to home base in North Carolina after speaking at the Swimming Coaches Convention for the last couple of days. Great time, great group of coaches, and we got a lot accomplished, a lot done. 3 good sessions in 2 days. So I'm tired, but I am excited to bring you this week's podcast episode. And that's why I wanted to get to it before I boarded my plane and jetted home to get off the road again. Today's guest is somebody that a lot of you are going to be familiar with, and it's John Brubaker. Now, Coach Bru, as he is affectionately known, if you follow him at Coach Bru, B-R-U, on Twitter, and you've heard him speak maybe at the National Collegiate Recruiting Conference, or you have brought him to your school to speak to your staff because he works with colleges and even professional teams all over the country. You know what his story is. He is a former college lacrosse coach who decided to leave coaching and pursue other things, and one of those other things was becoming an author, a speaker, a consultant, and he does that now all over the country. He just released a new book which I've been excited to talk about with him for all of you, for coaches, because I think it's a book that is going to belong in your coaching library. And the book is Stadium Status. And I'm going to let, in our conversation, Coach Bru explain everything. And what John Brubaker does in this book is just to give you a quick summary as we lead into the conversation. He went through different people, a lot of them from the entertainment industry, that have achieved what he would describe as stadium status. In other words, they've created such a unique brand, they have created such a unique story about themselves that they sell out stadiums. They are a destination for their fans and people who love rock and roll, love country, whatever the music is. He went and he interviewed a lot of these individuals, and he's done research on other leaders in their respective industries and found out what they did to achieve their stadium status. And the lessons in this book are so key for coaches, not only in the recruiting game that you play, but also just in forming the right kind of reputation and brand for your program that your fans, alums, and future recruits and your current players gravitate to. So I want to get right to the conversation because it was a long one, a really, really good one, and I'm anxious for you to listen to it and learn from it. And we started it out very simply, I think, with Coach Bru. We asked him, what is stadium status and how does somebody achieve stadium status?
That scholarly journal, UrbanDictionary.com, defines stadium status to mean a big enough star that you could fill an entire stadium when performing a concert. You know you're big once you've achieved, quote, stadium status.
Got it. Okay, so, and I know the book revolves a lot around, performers or people that would normally fill up a stadium and, draw that crowd. There's a reason to go see that performer, that entertainer. So very quickly, I want to focus this back onto college coaches. So for the coach that's listening and they're a first-time head coach, maybe they're young into leading a program, or they're a Division III assistant coach, this is their first coaching job and they're still trying to learn the ropes. How does stadium status apply to them in their careers right now?
Stadium status applies to them because the stadium status, the truly stadium status performers, didn't arrive at stadium status by doing the same thing everybody else does.
Okay.
They blazed their own trail and they did it, I wouldn't even say a little differently. I'd say they did a lot differently. And there's an old saying, success leaves clues. Well, I went and found those clues in a variety. You'd mentioned entertainers. It's not only entertainers, Dan, but anyone who calls the stadium their office. Interviews or anecdotes from strategies they've used that I've then gone and tested and used myself with my clients or my own business. So it's all road tested. How it applies to, let's say, small college coach, Division III coach, is, most of us recruit the way we were recruited as athletes. No one went to college and majored in recruitment. There's, until Tudor University, there was no curriculum. See what I did there? Nice little subtle plug. Tudor University.
I appreciate it.
There's no curriculum until now. So we've done the same thing that everyone else has done.
Right.
And that's going to, everyone likes to use the buzzword in business and even in academia, best practices. Well, here's the problem with best practices is they're common practices because everybody's doing it. And that's not how you get a freaking awesome campus visit, Dan Tudor.
That's right. Another plug for that book. Thank you. So, okay, but let me stop you there because coaches coach in an environment on a college campus, and many of them, follow the rules laid out by the NCAA and their athletic department, and those are just by design a little constrictive. And so I think I'll say the average coach, certainly a newer coach that doesn't want to mess up, they want to make this their career, and so they have the tendency to play it safe, is listening to what you just said and say, well, easy for you to say, John, because you're talking about entertainers, you're talking about people who can take wild risks and become this unique property. Well, I have to follow my head coach's rules or my athletic department or the NCAA. There's only certain things that I can do, and so I can't be creative. I have to be like everybody else. What would you come back and answer that coach who, and I know there are coaches that are listening to that. That's the first thing that popped into their head. How do you answer that?
How I answer it is you take a page out of somebody else's book. That's an objection, and that's not a real objection. The real reason why they would say that is they're afraid of what might happen. I think there's a legitimate fear of success.
Right.
And I think by stepping outside of your comfort zone, I'll give you a great example. Blake Anderson, the head football coach at Arkansas State University, is the most outside of the box, creative, within the rules, thinker and recruiter that I think you're going to meet. He is a stadium status recruiter. I feature him in the book for that reason. And he's just done some things that they're perfectly within the confines of the NCAA and institutional rules, but they're different and they're a little not outside the box, but like there is no box for what he does. He, his staff meetings, he asks the question, what's one thing we can do that no one else does or no one else can do? And you'll probably recall ESPN, Sports Illustrated, all the major media outlets covered this. He auctioned off being a coach for the day for their spring game on eBay.
Right.
It was a huge, huge fundraiser. But I would argue the true success wasn't the fundraiser. It was the attention.
Right.
That small, Sunbelt Conference program got, not just in the state of Arkansas, when the flagship university's down the road and they're in the SEC, but nationally, to the point where the NCAA stepped in and said, is this legal? They couldn't find a single reason why it wouldn't be legal.
Right.
And it's just another way of engaging and mobilizing your boosters, your fan base. It's so creative that I wish everyone took the approach with their staff and with their recruiting. What's one thing we can do that nobody else does? Right. And I give countless other examples in the book of that, from other people that call the stadium the office. But that's the jumping off point for, the small college coach, the Division III assistant who's trying to work their way up the ladder or make a name for themselves or even just make their head coach look good. is let's get creative, because that's what wins. We're in it. The economy's changed, and the landscape of, I'm not even talking about like the financial economy. I'm just talking about, how we market to people. We're in an attention economy. Like, that's the most valuable commodity there is right now, is capitalizing on people's attention. And that's the way to do it.
As you were telling that story, I thought about the 30 for 30 special on ESPN on John Calipari, the basketball coach at University of Kentucky. And there was an element, I didn't even put it together until you were just talking about this, where he has embraced the one and done aspect of college basketball. It was sort of the dirty little, thing that coaches never really liked to talk about before. Or it didn't seem right that a kid would come in, play for a year, and then go to the NBA. And college athletics sort of has frowned on it. And what John Calipari did, and they talk about it in the documentary, is basically say, hey, if I can take a kid who grew up in an inner city and has a family he needs to take care of, and they can come here for a year and then be good enough to go into the NBA and sign a $12 million contract that changes the life of their family, who am I as a coach to prevent that? Heck yes, I'm going to do that every chance I get, because I owe it to these kids. And so, you could even take a philosophy that's controversial, or a philosophy that is the norm, and you can be the coach that says, nope, I'm gonna tweak it and go the other way. So it was interesting to hear him talk about that. And obviously, if you're a kid who thinks you has that you have that talent and you're going to want to do that, then he's going to be one of the people that you're going to probably think of taking a serious look at, because he has a history of doing it and he has embraced it.
You talk about the marketing message behind that, and this is factual, because I've heard him speak on this. University of Kentucky Wildcat basketball has produced more millionaires than the Gatton College of Business and Economics MBA program at the University of Kentucky. You talk about positioning and marketing, and it's...
But I think it goes back to that principle that you're talking about, is the importance of risk-taking. And in the book, as you were doing research, is that a common element for people to achieve stadium status? Whether it's a coach or an entertainer, did you have to take risks? Is that one of the sort of essential components of being a stadium status individual?
Absolutely. There has to be, number one, you have to take chances and risk. I would prefer to use the term experiment. Everyone's afraid of risk, and everyone's, the natural fear of change. But instead of viewing
and
something
failure too,
as,
because
failure,
because an experiment could go wrong, and we have, especially a younger coach might be, scared of the idea of failure. So that's a great point.
Sure. So we have a fear of change, fear of failure. So instead of calling it a risk or change, look at it as an experiment. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, can you tweak it a little? Can you adjust the ingredients a little bit to get a better result? And if not, throw it away, scrap it. But that's what you've seen. These stadium status performers aren't risk averse, and they also have a bias towards action. They're very, and I think, college coaches are very entrepreneurial as well, but stadium status performers are entrepreneurial, and they have a bias towards action. They're going to try something, and they're going to experiment, and they're going to adjust on the fly. It's no different than the coach in the game, calling timeout and making an adjustment, or a halftime adjustment. If only we did that a little more.
Yeah. So, okay.
Off the field.
Yeah. Okay. So what we talked about, risk being one of the essential elements of achieving stadium status. And again, with the coaches in mind that are listening to this, give me 2 or 3 other things that you would say are must-have ingredients for people to really make a name for themselves and achieve great things in their career.
Sure, and it's the 3 things I'm about to share are actually the 3 sections of the book and the stadium status formula, and that's vision, execution, and connection.
Got it.
You have to have a vision of where you want to be, where you want your career to be, what you want your recruiting class to look like. You have to have a vision of that before you even get started, because everything happens twice. First you go there in your mind, and then it happens in reality. But if it doesn't happen in your mind first, and you don't have that vision, you're really sabotaging your chances.
Got it. So if something, where do you feel like most people who fall short of achieving stadium status or just don't do it the right way, at what point does that happen? Like in those 3 steps, or those three components that you just mentioned, where do most people make the mistake or fail to do it or don't take that part of it seriously?
I think most people, the mistake or the trap they fall into is they're chasing something else. Mm-hmm. They're in business. I'll give you a business parallel, and then I will give you the college recruiting parallel. In business, people are and organizations are making decisions based on the financials this month, this quarter. You'll see companies lay off people just to make the books look better, to appease their shareholders at the end of the month. And you see the same thing in recruiting. They're chasing, it might be numbers. They're chasing what they think might be the best player, as opposed to chasing the process of identifying and recruiting the right player. So I like to say chase excellence and the dollars will find you. Mm-hmm. You chase excellence in the process, and the right prospects will be attracted to your program.
Right.
So I think that's the trap, is we get caught up in this numbers game. And yes, it is a numbers game, but we need to get caught up in chasing excellence, not chasing numbers.
Okay, so at this point, I can almost hear a lot of the coaches listening to this saying, hey, this is starting to make sense. I get it. And yeah, I want to achieve stadium status, as Coach Brubaker is talking about in his new book. But the question then becomes, what is it that I need to do first as a coach?
Well, the first thing I'd have a coach do is realize that you need to look at not just your season or your class, or you need to look at your career from the stadium backwards. So, going back to that small college Division III assistant perhaps, or anyone else, but that's a great example that you gave, is look at your career from the stadium backwards. And that's an example from an interview I actually did with the country band Parmalee, who are from not too far away from where you live, Parmalee, North Carolina. Right. And they're a small town, local kind of band who faced a lot of adversity, couldn't get a record deal, didn't have a lot of traction. I won't go into the whole story of the tragedy that struck them at one point in their journey, but Matt Thomas, their front man, said something to me when I was talking with them. He said, we've always, even when we were just playing local gigs, like at a local school or the local tavern, we always viewed our career from the stadium backwards. And I think that's where the vision starts. Right. Back before they had even a regional presence, they were just a local band, but they viewed themselves as stadium status. So it starts, it's a state of mind. And speaking as a former recovering college coach, what I tried to do, and people thought I was insane. Maybe they just weren't crazy enough, but I inherited an awful team when I first became a head coach. And the first thing I did when we wrote out our schedule was I included the conference championship, the first round of the NCAA tournament, all the way through to the NCAA championships on Memorial Day weekend. And people were looking at me like I was nuts. My first year, we were 5-5.
Right.
We lost the first 5 games on the road, and we lost the next 5 games at home. But I think it starts with that vision of where you want to go. And if you don't have clarity on that, I don't think you have anything.
Okay, so let's
Did you get the quick math there?
Yeah.
5 and 5.
Yeah. So what are the things that you've seen, and you did a lot of research for the book, and you talked to a lot of people. This isn't just your philosophy and your thought. You actually, the great thing about it is you took real life examples that people can learn from. And I'm just wondering, because we talked about what to do and what is the thing that all these bands had, or entertainers had, or individuals had in their success. I guess I'm just wondering, if you look back at your coaching career, and you have probably now realized, oh, I should have done it this way, or I really messed up by doing it that way. What are the things, can you give me one or two things that you would have changed about the way you approached it as a coach? And I ask that because I think other coaches love to learn from their peers and what they either did wrong or learned through a process so that they can skip over that learning and just jump right to the success. I'm just wondering, everything that you've talked about, how does that, if you look back at your coaching career as a lacrosse coach, give me like one or two things that you would have done differently now, knowing what you know.
It's a great question. The number one thing I would do differently, if I could go back and do it all again, was I would add what I call a shade of gray to either formally to my staff or informally, just as a resource. I'm not talking about 50 Shades of Gray. Get your minds out of the gutter, people. What I'm talking about is I go out and find a mentor, who had gray hair. Like, if you either didn't have any hair, or you either need to have gray hair or no hair. So I know you've got a wealth of life experience in the profession, and I would lean on them, for advice, strategy, counsel. I think one of the things that we get so caught up in being the one, in the front of the meeting room, in the front of the locker room, sitting in the head coach's chair. We're expected to have all the answers, by our players and by our staff. Right. When in reality, instead of having to look inward for all the answers, look outward to a mentor. And the best example of this that I saw was Urban Meyer. Mm-hmm. When he took over at Florida, he attributed, someone asked him in an interview, what was your key to success at Florida? And he said that it was in 2003, he hired a guy named Hiram DeFries, who's a retired lawyer and oil exec. And he hired him to be his team's chemistry coach. And legitimately, the only thing in this guy's job description was make sure everybody's on the same page on and off the field. And 2 national championships, 4 conference championships later, Urban Meyer thinks that this guy was more important to their success than anything else, is to demonstrate just how valuable he felt having that shade of gray and that, life experience and wisdom was. When he left Florida and went to Ohio State, he had it written in his contract that he could bring one person with him. And that was who he called his chemistry coach, and that was Hiram DeFries. Wow. You think about the success they've had now at Ohio State. So I wish I would have leaned on somebody, a coaching veteran. It wouldn't even necessarily have to be someone with college coaching experience or a ton of coaching experience, but a ton of life experience, who was successful in another realm and could just impart some of that wisdom on me as often as possible.
Right.
I think those mentors are out there. We just have to go find them.
Right. And that's an active thing that, a younger coach or even a first-time head coach can do or should do, is actively look for the people that they can lean on. And that may not be, just from experience and seeing how coaches have done it right, that may not be a person at your school. It may not be a person in your sport, but another coach in a different sport. Because, as you know, coaches get kind of territorial, and they don't want maybe people in their peer group to know that they're struggling with something, or that they have a question or don't know how to do something. And so sometimes it's easier if you have a friend or that advisor and mentor at another school. But the point is that you're well taken that you just said, John, is you got to find somebody, and so that's a fantastic point.
I think it's irresponsible, Dan, for a coach not to go out and find that person. Like, as I look back, that was my biggest mistake. It was incredibly irresponsible of me, because if you want your players, you're telling your players they need to be coachable and they need you as their coach. You're not walking your talk if you don't have someone coaching you.
Right.
It rings hollow to them, and they can sniff that out. So think about the credibility that, like, say, an Urban Meyer gained by having this person on staff who he looked to for counsel and accepted those suggestions, welcomed that input,
right,
and implemented it. Like, wow, okay, we're going to be a little more coachable because we see our coach walking his talk.
Right. Right. Do you think that changes? I mean, you bring up an example, for instance, Urban Meyer hiring the chemistry coach and some of the other people at high levels that you just hear the stories about, they get publicity. The small school, the mid-level D1, the Division II school, or just the D1 sport that doesn't have the huge budget that football, basketball does. I see, I'm not even sure how to ask this question, but I see a lot of coaches struggling with the idea that they can be creative, that they should be creative and take risks because, well, but we just have this, or we only this, or I don't get as much as whatever. And I'm going to maybe have you go back to that idea of creativity for that coach. Maybe it starts with a mindset that it sounds like the wrong mindset that a lot of coaches go into program development or how they view themselves. Maybe they just have that wrong mindset. Maybe that's where maybe it's not so much a question, it's a statement. So maybe play off of that statement and let me know what you think about that.
Sure. I think there's a natural tendency for people to approach things with a scarcity mindset as opposed to an abundance mindset, to look at the negative, what we don't have as opposed to the positive and what we do have. Mm-hmm. And we need to capitalize on our strengths and leverage the resources we do have, because the reality of it is, if you're a small private tuition driven school, what are the odds of your budget really increasing to the point where you're going to get even a fraction of everything that you want anyway? It's unrealistic.
Maybe here's where maybe I'm going with that is, what I hear you say, and I was thinking about this as you were talking, you can't wait. You can't wait for the perfect situation to begin building stadium status. So Parmalee, that you mentioned, the band, the country band, had they waited for the record deal, had they waited for the big break, and not been proactive in thinking creatively, being positive, it probably wouldn't have happened. And maybe that's the same for coaches, is that I think there's this problem throughout college athletics of coaches waiting for stuff to happen to them that then makes them successful. And the big thing that I'm hearing you talk about is you can't wait. You have to be proactive in taking a hand into making it happen.
Yeah, you have to bet on yourself, and you have to create your own opportunities. So the example I gave with Parmalee is, you want to talk about going all in, pushing all your chips to the middle of the table and betting on yourself. They each had, like, I know Matt Thomas had at least $120,000 in credit card debt at like 36% interest at one point, he was telling me. But that's the extent to which they bet on themselves. They went out and got an RV. They couldn't afford a tour bus. They went out and got an RV. They, paid for the gas to get from one gig to the next with the credit card, for equipment and what have you. But they were betting the whole time. And this is the beauty of it. The whole time is they weren't waiting to be discovered. They were going out there and getting in front of audiences and respecting their audiences and treating them to a mind-blowing experience. Right. All the while betting on themselves. And they had a bias. We go back to what I said earlier. They had a bias towards action. And I would argue that they had faith and trust that things would work out in the end.
Right.
And that's why it did.
So, okay, so let's begin to develop an action plan. I also want to ask you about...
Can I add a disclaimer, Dan? I am not suggesting that a coach take the school credit card and go out and max it out to purchase whatever equipment you think you need that you don't have in your budget. So, like, if there's an athletic director listening, I assure you that was not the intent of my message.
Well, for the athletic director that's listening, you just made him or her think to themselves, wow, I'm glad I instituted those spending limits on those cards.
Exactly.
So I think we're safe, but your disclaimer is duly noted. So for the coach that's out there, and I ask you this, and I do want you to talk about a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at the 2017 National Collegiate Recruiting Conference, because we're thrilled to have you back there. But for the coach that's looking for an action plan, kind of lay that out. What are the things that, you've talked about the philosophy, you've talked about what coaches should and shouldn't do generally, but now you have this coach that's listening saying, okay, you know what, I'm all in, Coach Bru, and I'm going to get the book, but I'm also going to, I want to start this now. I don't want to be just another ordinary coach, another ordinary recruiter, another person just going through the motions. I want to create a dynamic coaching career for myself. Can you lay out what your recommendations would be, again, coming from a former coach, the first 3 or 4 things that they should do right now, today, as they stop listening to this podcast, to start that process, whether it's a big thing or a small thing?
Yeah, the number one thing you need to do is you need to go buy real estate. And what I mean by that is you need to buy the domain name. Let's say Dan Tudor is a college coach. Mm-hmm. You need to buy dantudor.com. You also need to go buy firedantudor.com. Because, again, beginning, working from the stadium back, like we talked about, and having that vision, there will come a day when your brand reaches the status, we could call it stadium status. There will come a day where you reach that point where there will be haters, right, and they're going to try and purchase firedantudor.com. Fortunately, you're self-employed, as am I, so that is a non-issue for us. But for the coach out there, you want to buy, you want to invest in that real estate because that's part of your brand. I think you can get a domain name for like $6. Spend the $12 and get those
Absolutely.
2 domains. There's a great resource in episode number 2 of College Recruiting Weekly, which features Jeff Osterman.
That's right.
I think Jeff has done a fabulous job, probably better than anybody I've ever encountered.
Just for anybody who doesn't know, he is the associate coach at the University of South Florida women's basketball program, and he is, I think, one of the best coaches / branders that I've ever met, and just fantastic person as well. And I know you know him, and so yeah, that episode 2 in our podcast lineup does a great job of him just talking about how he has branded himself and how any coach can do that. So thanks for that reference. That's a good one.
Absolutely. And Jeff's the kind of guy that if you reach out to him, he's a lot of coaches hold on to their secrets, like they've got the launch codes to nuclear weapons. What I really respect and admire about Jeff is he's not like that at all. He is very giving, willing to share. You reach out to him, I'd virtually guarantee you he's going to get back to you with some open, honest answers. And I think, again, we need to be approachable. And this kind of segues into my next suggestion is that people need multiple ways to connect back to your brand. And when I say your brand, I don't necessarily mean the athletic program or the institution you represent. That's sure part of the picture. But the brand that is uniquely you, coach, I'm speaking to you. There's so much clutter in the market today. Cyberspace, you think of all the different things that tug at our attention. Everyone's so distracted. If you're just relying on a couple of ways to reach out and make people aware of you, you're missing out. I think that the best example I can give you is something I actually learned from the person that wrote the foreword to my book, and that's Cowboy Troy Coleman. And if you're not familiar with Cowboy Troy, talk about dominating and owning a space. He invented what he trademarked the term hick hop, and that's rap and country, a blend or a fusion of rap and country music. If you've seen the ESPN College Game Day theme song and promo, you've seen Troy front and center in action there, 6'8", 265-pound guy with a cowboy hat. But he explained to me something called the Law of Sevens. And this is kind of a key to success that he found, is that people need at least 7 ways to connect back, your message to you. And you think about how we remember things, Dan. 7's kind of a lucky number in a few different ways. What are some famous 7? 7 wonders of the world, 7 days in a week, 7 deadly sins. But, it's kind of like putting multiple lines in a stocked pond if you're a recruiter. So, the way Troy did it was he has hosted television programs like Nashville Star and USA Network. He tours with Big and Rich. He tours himself.
But here again, as you're bringing up this example,
it's exposure.
And it's there again. You had somebody that took. Okay, so country music, been around a long time. You got a certain way of doing it, certain sound and everything. And what he did was said, I'm going to be different. And I keep coming back to, as you're talking, this idea of you really have to be different. You have to be unique. And even if you're an assistant coach making barely enough to live on and it's your first job and you don't feel like you know what you're doing, to be that person that, is you have to do something different. And certainly your recruiting message, it has to be different than everybody else. And the way that you interact with mom and dad has to be different. So I keep coming back to that because Cowboy Troy is different in that niche, in that market. He has carved out his own unique setting. And I'll also say, maybe you can comment on this, not to take you away from the steps that we're giving, but when you're different, well, it kind of goes back to the fire Coach Tudor website domain that you're going to buy. That
I already bought that, by the way.
I know that's not true. I have it, and I post to it regularly. There's days where I should be fired, but I guess that when you're different and when you start achieving that success because of that difference, you're going to have people that don't like you because there's a whole mess of people that say, we don't want different. We want you to be miserable just like us. We want you to struggle just like we do. And so that's that just is, that theme keeps coming back into my mind as I'm talking to you. So go ahead and continue or wrap up the steps.
I was just going to say, find a way to find at least 7 different ways to connect people back, in terms of who you are and what you do. And one of the things Troy does, he doesn't get national airplay for his music, but how can he get on the radio? Well, one of the things he does, he's a huge college sports fan, and he knows more about college football than probably a lot of the talking heads on the sports channels. He's a weekly guest on some sports talk shows during college football season. And that's something he went out and found and initiated himself. And I think it's something anybody can do. I remember I heard Mark Mangino, football. He's retired now, I believe, isn't he?
I believe so. Yeah.
But former football coach. Back when he was an assistant, I think it might have been like at Oklahoma. But he was disappointed. He tuned into the local sports talk radio show, and they're talking about one of the other teams in their market, one of their rivals, and he wanted to change the conversation, so he just called in under a different name, like he was Joe or Dan or John or whoever, and said, hey, I'd really like to talk about Oklahoma and, what they have going on. Speak. Like, he changed the conversation. He took a chance that, hey, maybe they won't, I'll disguise my voice a little bit. Maybe they won't recognize me, but I'm going to get these guys in the media to stop talking about my competition and start talking about us. Right. And I just thought that was genius, but most people wouldn't, A, put themselves out there to do that, or B, even think to do that. So I think it's a great example. How are you changing the conversation from a recruiting standpoint, in the minds of your prospects? And how are you staying top of mind? Because there need to be 7 different ways.
Right. Okay, so talk a little bit about your topic at the upcoming conference, the National Collegiate Recruiting Conference in June. We're very excited to have you back, and you always bring probably one of the most creative, thought-provoking talks every year. And so I'm anxious to hear about this year. What is the title, and kind of what are you going to be giving college coaches that attend or watch it on video?
Well, what did I do last year that you thought was so creative, Dan?
Something about penguins jumping off a ladder.
You set the bar so high.
Yeah.
And the year before, what did I do?
Hey, listen, there's been fire, there's been jumping off of ladders, there's been all sorts of stuff that I just hope like hotel officials don't come in and watch you doing it and it voids our insurance contract with the hotel or something.
So this year, it's going to be a little different. And what I'm talking about is low-tech, high-touch. Why you want to be, I'm going to throw in a metaphor here, folks. Pay attention. Why you want to be a vinyl recruiter in a digital world. You want to be more like the vinyl record than you do, the iTunes track. Mm-hmm. And personally, I simply believe, because today's such an instant, on-demand, fast-paced, high-tech world, I actually believe low-tech wins. Because there's so much clutter with technology.
Yeah.
Versus,
and automation and impersonalization.
Yeah. Versus that personal connection.
Right. Absolutely.
So my goal isn't to have someone in a penguin suit jump off a ladder or eat fire. My goal is just to make a personal connection with these folks.
Right.
And I'm really looking forward to NCRC, Dan.
Yeah. No, it's going to be really, really good. And if you're a coach that's listening and it's before the end of May, you still have time to sign up. You can go to dantutor.com, go to the conferences tab, and all the information is there. So
can I put a plug in for NCRC?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Per the theme of my talk, low tech, high touch. Like, I really believe that's the value or the hidden value of an event like NCRC. Is the networking and the connections and speaking to other coaches to get some creative ideas, things that they're doing well that maybe you hadn't thought of, or some different strategies on, how they qualify a prospect. I think so much of the learning doesn't take place listening to somebody like me on stage. It takes place, in the lounge over a cup of coffee or at dinner with a group of people, and just hearing how different coaches in different sports operate, and then continuing that conversation the other 364 days of the year until the next one. I know I always learn a lot just sitting down and talking with some of the participants as a result. Right. That's the real value and why people should invest in going.
I appreciate that.
It's not an expense, it's an investment.
No, I absolutely agree there.
Because you get a return.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, to wrap things up, I wanted to ask you one last question, getting back into the final sort of wrap-up for Stadium Status, and we'll post the link where to buy the book and everything. You can look at it, obviously, Barnes & Noble, on Amazon, anywhere online or anywhere that you get books. It's going to be available there on the shelf or to order. But I guess I'm wondering, we're talking about this achieving stadium status, and it's got to be, I'm maybe asking you, and the people that you talk to, it's got to be more than just achieving the goal or achieving whatever their definition of success is. And I guess I'm wondering, is there anything in the people that you talk to, or just in the coaches that that you would have said they've achieved stadium status, where it has become that it's been about something more than just the success, or been about something more than just the money or the title, because that can provide a pretty empty returns. I mean, sometimes when you finally get the head coaching job, you realize that all the guns are pointed right at you, and so I'm just wondering what what is there anything that you would sort of either caution coaches with, or that you discovered that maybe it was a little bit different in people's, once they achieved it, it was a little bit of a different feeling than they were expecting?
Sure. I think the first thing that the biggest lesson from these stadium status performers, and the biggest lesson I learned in my book launch, launching this is my 6th book, and I launched it very differently than everything else I've ever done. The biggest lesson was these guys all have a lot of fun with what they do. And if you're not having fun, I think you're doing it wrong. I think that is the biggest lesson, is when you go out on a limb and you do something a little different and creative, make sure there's an element of fun for you. Because so often, as a coach, I know I did it, and most of my coaching peers that I'm still in touch with and friendly with take themselves so darn seriously. Like, if you're talking to another coach about X's and O's and you have to refer to it as matriculating the lacrosse ball down the field, and this is legitimately a conversation I had with someone a couple of months ago. They were talking about how they clear the ball. Not the ball, the lacrosse ball. Like, get over yourself. Really? Just have fun. But so often we become uptight because it is a very cutthroat, competitive, results-driven business. And I actually think taking a step back and just making sure if you're having fun, your players are having fun. And if your players are having fun, they're probably getting out of their own head and getting lost in just enjoying the process and being mindful and being present with what they're doing. And isn't that what you really want?
Coach, that is going to wrap it up. I really appreciate you listening, and I want to also thank author, consultant, and all-around expert at recruiting and program development, John Brubaker, for lending time to talk about his new book. And I really recommend you go right now and go online or go to your bookstore and order Stadium Status by John Brubaker. It is going to be one of the best investments of development into your program that you can make, and it is a book that belongs on your shelf, Coach, so do it now. Until next time, I want to thank everybody for listening, and get ready for more good stuff coming up in the future on the College Recruiting Weekly podcast. I got to go now and catch an airplane.